Hello, everybody. So here we are again. It's Thursday, the 16th of April, and we're still on lockdown. And I will continue to do these mini broadcasts for as long as we are in lockdown, just to give everybody and anybody an opportunity to get support, ask questions, and think about relationships and sexuality, which is what I do. I'm a couples psychosexual therapist. I run my own practice online. I've been in practice for over 25 years, and I've worked with a whole range of issues. Let me just say that, first of all, my name is Lena Fenton. Once again, welcome. I've worked since 1994 with a whole range of issues and problems that people have. One of my main focuses for the first 10 years at least was working with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Although I also worked in a prison with drug users, and I worked in a women's center that provided counseling for women who had been in domestic violence situation, who'd been trafficked, who'd been sex slaves, and so on. In the early 2000s, I qualified as a life coach, and then mid 2005, I also got a master practitioner training in NLP, that's neuro-linguistic programming. It wasn't until about 2010, however, that I decided that I wanted now to specialize in working with couples. And I did that, and I followed that with a master's in sex therapy. So that's my current focus, is relationships and sex, basically. So today I want to talk about, unless I've got people actually posting questions on the live chat, I'm going to talk about female sexuality in general. I have some questions around that I've collected from people, and I will try and focus on those questions. But let me just start by saying that female sexuality is a huge subject. It's a huge range of issues, really. Because, well, it encompasses everything that's to do with the feminine gender, in effect, from birth right through to death, and everything in between. And I believe that actually our sexuality ought to be as individual as each one of us, each one of you are. And so the things I'm going to say are going to be generalizations and won't apply to everybody, and are not intended to apply to everybody. However, having said that, we all have bodies of different types, with different abilities that function in many different ways, but nonetheless, we all have bodies. And part of that physiological makeup is usually some kind of sex drive, some kind of sexual desire, some kind of gender identity, and so on. And generally for people, it starts with puberty, when the hormones begin to change the way that our bodies actually look. So girls, for instance, will develop breasts. That's the most visible sign that puberty is taking place. But teenage children everywhere will begin to also grow hair in the normal places. And also their sense of themselves changes, a sense of identity, and a sense of an adult identity begins to come into play. And with that, much self-exploration, sexual exploration of the opposite gender, and so on. So here comes an interesting question that was posed to me about female sexuality. I was asked if it is the case that female sexuality is just about being sexy. Well, It kind of is, but it's so much more than that. Much more than that. I think being sexy is also to do with multi-layered things. It's to do with how you feel you look and how you feel about yourself and what you believe about yourself. And I think I may sneeze. Excuse me a second. I'm going to reach for some tissues just in case I do. Being sexy. That is such a broad term, isn't it? Because what being sexy or feeling sexy is for you might not be for me, might not be for your friend or your neighbor or anybody else for that matter. So again, it's very individualistic. I think we in our culture, certainly in the Western culture, we create stereotypes of what being sexy is. And I think for most young girls, especially in their puberty years, it's really all about trying to match those ideal constructed images of what sexy is. But it's also driven, I guess, by what men think sexy is. Whereas I think, personally, my opinion is that genuine sexiness comes from feeling good about yourself. And it's not necessarily about how you look. But I believe and I see that everywhere, young women absolutely believe it's everything to do with how they look and nothing to do with how they feel. Or at least that feeling good about yourself isn't enough for it to be what other people appreciate. So, we have young, healthy 18-year-olds with perfectly normal breast sizes having breast augmentation or reductions or all other kinds of cosmetic surgery because of trying to achieve this perfect ideal of beauty and sexiness. And I think that's very sad because I think we should be teaching our young people to find their own sexy, their own internal sexy first. And wouldn't it be great if you could then get with somebody who thinks that your sexiness is something that they find really attractive and sexy, rather than some kind of commercialized ideal, some kind of sexiness being some kind of commodity that you can purchase by having lip fillers or anything else. There is so much. Young girls are having so many treatments to their bodies that say everything about what you should look like and celebrates nothing of what one does look like. So being sexy is a really, I think, is actually quite a deep and complex question about female sexuality. But I'm getting another question, which is female sexuality a feminist thing? Gosh, I think I might have said in previous videos that I'm not sure that I would qualify myself as a feminist, because I also believe that men need emancipation. I believe that our present culture in many ways is oppressive to both genders. And it's not oppressing, it's oppressive because of the way that it limits what a man or a woman, a male or a female can be, should be, ought to be. It forces us to aspire to be only one thing. So for a lot of men, for a lot of women, for a lot of people, they feel that they have both masculine and feminine traits. And so it can cause a great deal of conflict within a person. Am I too manly? Am I too butch? Or am I too effeminate or too soft? As though a human being can only be one thing or the other, as though it's not possible for us to be at different times and for different reasons both. I can be pretty tough and I can be pretty vulnerable. I consider myself, both in terms of my identity and my presentation and how I feel about myself, absolutely 100% a female, a woman. But that doesn't mean that I don't have qualities that resemble masculine ones, or that men that I know that are very good men, very masculine men, have also got tenderness and vulnerability type qualities that we generally assign to females. So when we talk about sexuality and feminism, I find myself in a very difficult place, because I guess I would have to first of all say that I am a humanist. I believe that each individual human being should be able to be to define their own sexuality on their own terms. And feminine sexuality, I think, has been, I'm not quite sure what the word is, but it's been hijacked, I think, by the media, by men, by all kinds of things that has been anything but self-determining. So when a person, a female, sets about kind of discovering her own sexuality, she has a vast vast arena of things that kind of tell her what that should be like, and what she should feel, and what she should do, and what's right and what's wrong, and at what point, in what way do we guide young people to kind of explore their own sexuality on their own terms? So is it a feminist thing? No, I don't think so. I think sexuality is really about learning how to express yourself and to find your own self-expression in terms of your sexual need, your sexual expression, your sexual desire, and how you want to share that with other people is something that has to be, it's a journey that you undertake the moment puberty kicks in, really, almost whether you like it or not. Because the hormone moves from childhood, that forces you to look at that, and that journey is a very individual and unique one, and I can't stress that enough, really. I think that once a young woman gets into her 20s, she is perhaps beginning to come into her own. What do I mean by that? I mean that she is more likely from mid-20s onwards to try and express her own sexuality on her own terms, rather than be guided or pressured into the kind of sexuality that the media expounds, or that young women are pressured into because of what young men with their raging hormones say that they should be like or want, and so on. And unfortunately, I find that even in this day and age, even in the 21st century, lots and lots and lots of women, young women, females, teenagers, are still bullied into believing that if they don't give if they don't provide the kind of sexual experience for the male that the young man wants, that there's something wrong with her. So he somehow holds the standard of how she should behave sexually. And I think that by the mid-20s, a young woman will come away from that and start to kind of be more self-determined and feel more secure in her ability to demand for what she wants, ask for what she wants, express herself in the way that she wants. And that's fine. And I think that kind of that process, that learning and that development probably takes her into her early 20s, where often, certainly in my private practice, what I find often is that around the early 30s, around the early 30s, women start to think a biological clock kicks in, and women start very much to think about becoming mothers, whether or not they want children. They start to kind of make these considerations. This is a very broad generalization, and I'm aware that this isn't the way that it works for every single woman, and please don't think that that's necessarily what I mean. But I'm trying to just provide a kind of trace through the lifetime, so as to be able to talk about this consistently for you. I'm getting another question here, which is about sexuality and culturally relative. I'm somehow eating my words today. Apologies for my tripping up over what I'm saying. Culturally relative, I think it is absolutely culturally relative. I think it is related. It relates very much to what any one particular culture demands and expects of a young woman, of any woman actually, and her sexual behavior. It's interesting that it seems to have been globally acceptable to repress women's sexuality. Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, there are all the major religions somehow seem to have a say on how women should behave, and mostly it's about controlling their sexual behavior, which I think is a very interesting phenomena, actually. And perhaps it is to do with men's own fears, but that's a conversation for a whole other time. So yes, is female sexuality culturally relative? Yes, I think so. Depends what you mean by culturally relative, but it's certainly relevant in the sense that it pertains to any particular the one culture that you've grown up in or that you're living in, and how that culture determines your sexuality should be, or any woman's sexuality should be. And I think that there is a difference also between what it is widely culturally accepted and what is privately practiced. So there's all of that going on as well. Let me get back to my timeline. So in their 30s nowadays, certainly in the UK, women, my experience is that women generally are thinking about having babies, so that because the best knowledge, medical knowledge so far is that once you reach 35, your fertility declines, the quality of the ovums, and your chances of getting pregnant grow less. Certainly by the time a woman reaches 40, I had a gynecologist once tell me that after 40, a woman's fertility declines by something like 20% year on year. And yes, generally the menopause occurs in the late 40s, early 50s. Again, I will stress, this isn't every woman's path. It is what's most common in my current culture, which is in the UK. Now, I have here a question. I've obviously skipped over a great many things, but I have here a question about the menopause, so I shall go to that, because there's quite a lot to be said about that. It's a very problematic time, I think, for a woman when she's either perimenopausal, that's the period running up to the actual cessation of the menses, the period, and then she's actually then in the middle of the menopause, which is when the body is making huge changes and adjustments in hormonal levels, in all kinds of ways. And one of the things that is affected, of course, because this is all hormonal, is the fact that the libido changes. Now, it would be nice and neat to be able to say that it slows down, you lose your libido, etc., etc. But I've actually known women whose libido actually goes up, that become more sexually active past the menopause or during the menopause, that somehow the hormone balances change in such a way that she's liberated and she's able to become much more sexual. That's less common than the opposite, which is where the sexual desire declines, the body begins to not function quite so well sexually, The question that I actually have says, let me just bring it up on my phone. It says, let me just see if I can read it out loud. What are the options open to a woman to help her improve low sex drive during the menopause? And what about maintaining intimacy once the sex drive is next to nothing? So this is a question about what to do with a dwindling sex drive. So a dwindling desire for sex, a lack of desire perhaps entirely. There's a lot that goes along with lack of desire because it's about hormones. There's also a lot that goes on physiologically in the actual vagina and the vulva. And one of the things that happens is that there's less and less lubrication because the hormone estrogen, which is the one responsible for causing lubrication, which is what makes intercourse comfortable, is begins to reduce. And as that reduces, lubrication becomes less, desire becomes less, and sex actually becomes more uncomfortable, which then kind of affects desire, which then, and so on and so forth. To the point where, as in this question, the desire levels can actually go to zero. Now, what can be done about it? That's a very interesting question because there is quite a lot that you can do about it. But the first thing that has to be understood about this is that you're changing, your body's changing. And in order to understand how to be, your sexuality is changing. And therefore, what needs to happen is you need to be able to adapt to the physiological and psychological changes. Because make no mistake, the menopause doesn't just change your body, it changes the way that you feel and think too. Just like puberty changes the way that a young woman thinks and feels, as well as her body, the menopause does the same, if you like, in reverse. So that, for instance, when we're talking about sex drive, it might be easy to talk a little bit about first about how to set it up so that your sex drive can be stimulated. Now, if for instance, a woman has always had sex at a very physical level, so the stimulation is physical and the activity is physical, and there isn't much romance or foreplay, it might be that now is the time when that needs to change. And you need to get much more creative with how you have sex, because the hormone levels are low, it takes a lot more to build them up to a level where sex is where there's desire and there's comfort and well-being in one's own sexuality. So we're talking about doing a lot more with things like prepping the room, for instance, with music and soft candles. It's creating an environment, I don't know, that would actually feel romantic and warm and safe. But also that the love play has to be a lot slower and a lot more the preparation, the lead up time has to be longer. The foreplay has to be longer because it takes that much more time to bring the thermometer back up to hot, if you like. Because if we think about it as as the analogy of the thermometer, when it's cool, with the menopause, the thermometer goes lower and lower. So you're starting from a lower point to get to the boiling point again. The journey is much longer. So you've got to allow for that, and you've got to allow for that in yourself, but also in your relationship, so that your partner needs to know that you might need, more than 5 minutes foreplay. You might need 15, 20, you might need half an hour. That foreplay perhaps needs to be much more thought about. Another thing that I think is very helpful for the sex and the menopause is also something called Kegel exercises. That's Kegel, Kegel, yes. Look them up. I think that what you're doing with Kegel exercises, if you're a woman who's had children, you have been told postpartum to do Kegel exercises in order to be able to tone the pelvic girdle. There's a band of muscles that basically hold up most of the uterus and the bladder and all that stuff. And it's within, when those muscles are in good tone, the orgasms are much better, but also you bring more blood flow to the area, which keeps the area healthy and functioning, and makes you feel good and promotes sexuality as well. There are other ways also to improve that general area. You need to invest in some really good lubricants. You may need some lubricants all the way through the day as well as during intercourse, depending on what stage you are. Postmenopausal dryness is very common, and there's lots of really good quality products out there for you to investigate. The doctor may also prescribe hormone replacement if you discuss your options with your GP, that they would be able to advise you. And that can also bring the libido back up, the sex drive back up, because you're putting in the estrogen that would otherwise be lacking. So there's a couple of things. A few good romantic weekends away with your partner usually help. But really, you also need to adjust your mind to the fact that there is some very real, very profound changes going on. And you may need to mourn the loss of your old self. And that's part of the adjustment, I guess, as well. So another question I have here is sexiness hormonal? Absolutely, I think it can be. It can absolutely be. An interesting fact here, actually, is the fact that pregnant women, for some, their hormones are kind of like doing a lot of work. But for some women, they can get much more highly sexed during pregnancy than they are otherwise. And for other women, they can go off any form of sex. And that's very much hormonally driven, a little bit like women's emotions premenstrual or during pregnancy or even postpartum. These are emotional effects that are all hormonally driven. I'm not sure. I don't know whether the hormones would determine the level of overall sexuality. I'm not aware of any studies. There probably are some. I'm not aware of any studies that kind of tell us exactly whether that is the case or not. But you could kind of assume that maybe, like some men, some men are much more, they have higher testosterone maybe, and they're more sexually driven, and others aren't, they're not so bothered. But then this is a variation that, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, that it's a variation that's very much across the board for humanity, that we all have very unique and individual features that for all the generalizations that we can make, there is a unique individual in each one of us, with our own checks and balances, and hormonal balances are just the same. So just to reiterate really my introduction, which is that you are a unique individual. You need to develop and seek your own sexuality, and that needs to be on your terms and not on society's or cultural terms or religious terms for that matter. That's not to say that those things aren't valid and aren't based on something, but within that you have to find yourself. And I think that's a really important consideration, really. Can you find yourself as a woman within your own sexuality? And are you determining that? Or is somebody else? Or is society or family or partner or something? I'm sure I could say a great deal more about that. And in fact, I'd like to take this opportunity to just let you know that I'm writing a course on female sexuality, which will be available on my website in a couple of months' time, called Female Sexuality, strangely enough. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you for your company. And if you're watching this at a later stage, do enjoy and do send me comments and questions. I would welcome any positive feedback as well. Thank you.